Hi there, welcome. This is the Kelly's Astrology podcast, where you can find insight, guidance, and understanding through astrology. I'm Kelly, and I'll be your host. Hey there, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Kelly's Astrology podcast. So today's episode is a Q&A episode, and it will come out around the week of December 14. Recently, I asked you all if you had some questions because I had planned to do a Q&A episode at this end of year time. And I got a bunch of great questions. There were a number of questions around the same topic. And so that's what I'm going to focus today's episode on, which is about Pluto transits and kind of more specifically the entry of Pluto back into Aquarius and how that might be affecting various placements or houses in people's charts. So in today's episode, I want to answer some of those questions, which will hopefully give you a few ways of thinking about and maybe tips of working with Pluto transits that you might be having now that Pluto is in Aquarius. So we'll take about 20 minutes as we usually do, and I've got 3 or 4 questions that I hope to get through. If even after today's episode you want even more on Pluto transits, I do have a more detailed 90-minute webinar training called Pluto Transits, Treasure, Truth, and Transformation. I'll put the link to this webinar in the show notes below. So that goes into a lot of detail about how I think about Pluto transits, how I talk about them with clients, as well as the mechanics and the technicalities of figuring out if you're having a Pluto transit and what parts of your chart and life might be affected. I'm going to give you the highlights or as much as I can in our time together today, but I know given the topic is Pluto, some of you will have a kind of an insatiable appetite for more on Pluto transits and working with Pluto. So if you want more, that webinar, Pluto Transits, Treasure, Truth, and Transformation will be a great one to get. But for now, sit back, relax, and take in today's info. So the first question comes from somebody named Mebit New. And the question says, what can I expect from transiting Pluto in Aquarius in my 4th house, square the sun in Taurus in my 7th house? And they're sort of saying, please help. So first up, we're all going to have Pluto transits at some point throughout our life. Over the last 15 years, anybody who has planets in any of the cardinal signs has had a big Pluto transit. So if you have important parts of your chart in Cancer, Capricorn, Libra, or Aries, since 2008, you've been having a big Pluto transit. Prior to 2008, we had about 14 or 15 years of Pluto in Sagittarius, and that meant that everybody who had a lot of mutable placements, mutable planets, placements in Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, or Pisces was having a lot of Pluto transits. As Pluto comes into Aquarius, a fixed sign, all of you who have planets in the fixed signs, in Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, or Aquarius, will have one type of Pluto transit or another over the next 20 years or so. So first up, it'll be important to understand, is your planet in Aquarius or Taurus or Leo or Scorpio, is it around the middle of the sign? Is it around the end of the sign? If so, you still have a few years yet. If your planet or your angle, like your ascendant, midheaven, descendant, or IC is at the early part of a fixed sign, you might be in your Pluto transit already. So first things first, for this particular person, we've got transiting Pluto is in their 4th house, but the real thing that we want to focus on is what part of the birth chart is being activated by the Pluto transit, and that is the sun. Now, the sun is in the 7th house. However, the sun is connected to the 10th house, where this person will have the sign of Leo. And that's really important because if the sun rules the 10th house, then the sun is one of the primary planets to do with career for this person. And so Pluto square the sun can bring major changes, like a big overhaul around career, around life direction, around professional undertakings, but also about the roles or the titles that you have kind of in the world at large. And so Pluto square the sun, when the sun rules like the Leo 10th house or the Leo midheaven, will be bringing that transformational energy of Pluto into the career space. This can also bring some of the power dynamic energy of Pluto into the career space. That might mean having to step into your power at work. It might mean dealing with a controlling boss or having to find your way through a really intense or a controlling or even a toxic work environment. These are all possibilities. Sometimes when Pluto aspects by transit the ruler of the midheaven or the ruler of the 10th house, we are stepping into our power and our strength. We're having an impact. We are kind of reaching those upper echelons of our industry or of our field. And so there's options in sort of the subjective positive or the subjective negative here that the Pluto sun can go in. A Pluto transit is not a promise that things will be difficult or hard. Things will definitely be intense and they're going to engage you at a much deeper level. They're going to encourage you to overcome things from the past. That's for sure. That's definitely part of it. Now, of course, this sun in Taurus is sitting in the 7th house. So I can imagine from a student or a learner perspective, there is a real curiosity about what might this mean for relationships. And it might certainly mean something. It's going to mean Pluto things for relationships. It's going to mean transformations or changes to the way you express yourself with your closest people, with your loved ones, or in your most important partnerships. So that's also a piece you could look at. The sun, though, is one of those core, it is the core, if you like. It is the planet that represents the center of who you are, the essence, not just of who you are as a person, but the kind of center of the life that you're leading. And Pluto to the sun is a clue that we want to change the essence of who we are. Not only that we want to, but that it's necessary that we do, that we are ready to, like a snake shedding an old skin. And so with Pluto to the sun, it is definitely time to leave the old you behind and to think about bringing forward the interests, the expression of the new you, the things that are important to you at this age and stage of life. So these are some of the things that I would be expecting if you were a client I was talking to about Pluto square the sun. Given that Pluto's in the 4th and squaring the sun in the 7th, but my place to start would be, what are the general qualities of the sun, your vitality, your essence, your core, and thinking about them undergoing a massive kind of overhaul. You could think about a Pluto transit as like a deconstructing, rebuilding process. It's probably going to last anywhere from 12 months to 2 years. So we go slow and we go deep. When we're in a Pluto transit, our focus usually narrows so that we kind of get a little bit obsessed with just a few topics, a couple of people, or a particular area of our life. But I would probably start the conversation with a client having this kind of transit with a Leo 10th house and Pluto squaring the sun about what's going on at work or in your career. Or if they're a person who maybe is like a stay-at-home parent or has retired, I would be thinking about what is it that you want to do with your energy and effort day to day, and how do we need to change that based on what you've been doing? A Pluto transit to a planet in our birth chart will often take us on a journey from feeling a little bit disempowered, like we're not in charge of what's happening, or we feel like we're at the mercy of powerful people or forces outside of us. That can be where we start on the Pluto transit, but we usually don't stay there. What we do is we start to grapple with, okay, that's not great, and how or what can I do to change it? And so along the way, we figure out our strength, we test our kind of limits, we figure out, oh, I can say something about this, or I can push back about this. I don't have to do what is expected. I don't have to capitulate to what this other person is pressuring me to do, or this person at work, or what is expected of me around relationships, or what my family wants from me. I can instead make a choice to claim my own kind of agency or autonomy, my own power in that situation, and I can decide for myself. And the empowering process of learning that you can decide for yourself and that sometimes it is up to you to choose for you, that is a huge part of a Pluto square sun transit. So that's a part of how I would begin that discussion with a client. So hopefully, Mebit that gives you some tips and places to think about for your particular Pluto Sun transit. Of course, sometimes we're having a major Pluto transit and we've got other timing factors going on. Maybe you've got a big progressed thing, or something's happening with the progressed moon phases. So I would be also weaving in other factors. But if you're starting a Pluto Sun transit, we know that you've got, anywhere from 12 months to 2 years of intensity. You might be quieter, less social, less outgoing. You might be more introspective and reflective as you're going in and you are slaying dragons from the past, and you are kind of uncovering buried treasure, which can be talent or skill that you didn't know you were capable of. And that's kind of where we end up at the end of the Pluto transit. So that is our first question today. I feel like I could just talk about Pluto Sun transits for, hours, but hopefully that gives you a little snapshot about how to get into it and where to go to understand what your Pluto Sun transit might mean for you. Okay, the other questions on Pluto transits have a lot to do with, Pluto coming into different houses and thinking about how that might affect us. So let's start with the first question. This is from Aletsky, which I think I know who this person is. I think that's an amalgamation of their first and second names. And so Aquarius is their seventh house. So what they're saying is, Aquarius is my seventh with Pluto here. What type of lessons? So for all of us, wherever you have Aquarius in your chart, Pluto coming in is the start of a 20-year journey there. And some of the things I was just talking about with the Pluto Sun transit, they're happening in a slightly lower intensity format for that 20 years. So for this client, Pluto coming into the seventh house, the overhaul kind of pull apart and rebuild part of the chart in life is about relationships. It's about how to intimately connect with someone in that one-on-one space. And for many people, major activations to the seventh house have to do with romantic relationships. Now, I'm not promising that, with Pluto transiting the seventh house, it's just going to be one long, thread of really intense romantic entanglements, because it is a really long time. And so the other piece when we're thinking about Pluto coming into a new house or a new part of our birth chart is to think about, okay, this is a shift in the background kind of landscape here, but I'm going to be more or less attuned to it at different points in that 20 years based on a few things, based on whether Pluto is making a direct aspect to a planet or an angle in your chart, or based on whether you're perfecting through that Aquarius house. So for those of you who work with perfections, you'll know that every 12 years or so, the perfection comes to each house in the chart. So if this client's asking about their seventh house, off the top of my head, seventh house perfection years are 30, 42, 54, 66, and 78. I think I've done my math correctly there, but someone will correct me if I've got it wrong. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's right. 30, 42, 54, 66, and 78. So if, like this client, you're a Leo rising and you have Aquarius on the seventh house, you know that relationships will generally be more intense, more pivotal, more transformative, that your life might be kind of completely overhauled by a relationship that you have, a person that you meet, or a partnership that you form in this particular time. And so if while Pluto is in the seventh house by transit, you're going to turn 30 or 42 or 54 or 66 or 78, you will be having that extra focus on the topics of the seventh house. And that could be a more pivotal seventh house perfected year than usual. So what this client's really asking though is, Pluto's going to be in my seventh house. What are the lessons, or maybe what are the experiences that I could expect? So when we're doing romantic relationships under a Pluto influence, so this could be the transit of Pluto in the seventh, like this client's asking about. What I work with mostly with clients is if transiting Pluto is conjunct the descendant or is aspecting the ruling planet of the descendant. That's one of the biggest kind of Pluto relationship transits I look for. So you look at the sign on your seventh house cusp. You identify the traditional ruling planet of that sign, and you look to see if transiting Pluto will make an aspect to that traditional ruling planet that rules the sign on the descendant in your chart. And that's a big Pluto relationship cycle. So what I'm speaking to here about Pluto and relationships could apply in a few of these scenarios. So you're going to have experiences in relationship where there is this sort of magnetic, compelling quality to the connection, that you might meet someone and feel instantly or deeply connected or attracted to them. You might feel a bit obsessed with the person or the connection that you're sharing. You might find that you're meeting people who have more power or wealth than the types of people that you have met in the past. This might mean that they have more power or wealth than you, but not always. And I mentioned those two concepts because power and wealth are things that are kind of classic signatures of Pluto. So dealing with, different power dynamics or different wealth dynamics in romantic relationships or key partnerships could also be part of Pluto seventh house transit experiences. What Pluto is kind of looking for in relationships is loyalty and honesty. So there is this idea of being really truthful or raw and real and upfront about what does and doesn't work for you in a relationship. That may be very relevant if you're having a big Pluto seventh house transit. And this, it could happen the whole time Pluto's going through the seventh, the 20 years, but you'll probably experience it most strongly when you're in one of those perfected years while Pluto is in your seventh by transit, or if Pluto is making a direct transit aspect to the ruler of the seventh. And then you're going to get this sense of, how do I handle intimacy and handle trust? And intimacy can be emotional intimacy, it can be physical intimacy. With Pluto, it's really getting into that quality of trust and kind of, safety is not quite the right word. It's, can I be as real and as raw with this person, and will they kind of handle that, essentially? So these are some of the themes that with Pluto coming into the seventh, you might find yourself being fascinated about or drawn to. What we want to do under any kind of Pluto transit is we want to understand things at their most fundamental level. And often that means pulling things apart to understand the pieces, to really get to know the behaviors or the habits or the attitudes that are driving our experiences in this part of our life. So it's not uncommon for clients to tell me that they have just decided, kind of randomly out of the blue, but synchronistically with their Pluto transit, to go and do some therapy about X, Y, or Z concern in their life. And so with, Pluto going through your Aquarius seventh house or aspecting the ruler of the seventh, you might decide that you're wanting to do some intensive therapy or healing work about past relationships that haven't gone as you'd hoped, or about repairing your sense of your ability to trust other people. So with Pluto, we're really exploring that kind of loyalty, trust, betrayal dynamic. And we're trying to get into the depths of who we are to understand what inside me might be hesitant or ambivalent about forming intimate partnerships. And, regardless of who I may or may not meet, what can I shift inside me so that I'm more capable of connecting with people in this deeper, more intimate, more vulnerable way? So that's a bit of a riff on Pluto through the seventh house, but also to understand that, that energy will peak at different points of that longer transit based on some of those other factors I mentioned, like the perfected years or Pluto making transits to the ruler of the seventh, for instance. So our third question for today, continuing our Pluto transit theme, is a little bit different. This is from Angelou Lebs, and they're asking, how does Pluto exiting Capricorn affect a Capricorn sun with Capricorn in the eighth house? So this is a bit of a different way of framing this question, but they're sort of asking about the end of something that's been going on. And I think it's a very fair question because as astrologers, I know with clients and students, we're often really enthusiastic about where things are going and what might happen next. But there's actually a lot of rich wisdom and kind of treasure to gain or to distill by taking a look backwards. And so, as we're all getting excited about Pluto going into Aquarius, let's not forget that what has happened is that Pluto has just closed the door on a 15-year transit through Capricorn. And if you're curious about what does Pluto in Aquarius mean for the house that it's going into, think about what Pluto in Capricorn meant for the house that it is just leaving. Sometimes we get a better understanding when we're looking in the rearview mirror. We're like, oh, could never quite have imagined that Pluto in my, 10th house or 11th house or 12th house since 2008, while Pluto was in Capricorn there, that it would look and feel like this. But I can totally see the symbolism of like powerful connections or discovering my strength, taking charge of things and doing things like radically differently. That idea of the death rebirth cycle with Pluto is a clue that we want to make kind of permanent and profound changes. And so for this person, for Angelou Lebs, first of all, I want to say it's the end of a Pluto transit. So you've come to the end of something that has really changed you. And at the end of a Pluto transit, we're all a little bit like the butterfly emerging from the chrysalis. We have completely changed the physical form and shape that we are. Like the caterpillar went in and the butterfly comes out. And the thing coming out, the butterfly, it has, relative to the caterpillar, the power of flight. So it has an ability to move, to make an impact that the caterpillar didn't have. The butterfly also plays a really important role in terms of pollination in the garden. And so the butterfly has a little bit of a purpose or a task to do. And so for Angelou Lebs and for any of you who have major cardinal placements in your chart, as you come to the end of this Pluto and Capricorn time in your life, because that is never going to happen again. You will not live long enough to have Pluto and Capricorn again, because Pluto takes almost 250 years to go through the whole zodiac. If you're coming to the end of a Pluto transit, take some time to reflect on how different you are. What changes would you kind of identify specifically for yourself that looked like being the caterpillar at the start and being the butterfly at the end? And the butterfly has, a bit of a purpose or skills. It has the power of flight. It can pollinate things. And so what can you do now at the end of your Pluto transit that you couldn't do before that opens up opportunities or possibilities that just weren't an option beforehand? So Angelou Lebs, I would really encourage you to think about that. And you mentioned the 8th house is where you have Capricorn. And so the 8th house is a part of our chart. It's one of the money houses. It's the part of the chart that is to do with money, but also but specifically to do with things like investments, taxes, debts and loans, retirement saving and planning, couple and family finances. And so if you think about how you have totally reshaped those areas of life, how you handle taxes, how you handle money in a romantic relationship or with family, how you're managing debt and whether you're investing or saving for the future, you can really see in that longer 15-year look back what you have learned to do differently and how you have claimed your power there. And for all of us, we can think about what we've learned to do differently and how we've claimed our power around the topics of the Capricorn part of our chart. Now, the 8th house is also, for Angelou Lebs, it's also part of the chart to do with psychological stuff. So we often want to work through some of our worries or fears, some of our psychological concerns or stresses when we have big 8th house activations. So hopefully this can mark a bit of a threshold crossing for you where you're coming out of a period where you've been dealing more with that kind of inner psychological discomfort, and you're able to kind of be like, I've worked through some stuff and I can close that door behind me. Okay, so far we're making good time. I think we're going to squeeze in one more question before the end of today. And this is from Melissa McKee, I think. And she asks, Pluto entered my 5th house where I have Mars and the North Node, and Mars is my malefic. Any concerns? So I'm guessing that Melissa's referring to Mars being something known technically as the out of sect malefic. Now, we all have one of these planets. It's either Mars if you're born in the daytime or Saturn if you're born at nighttime. And I do have teachings. I have a course called Introduction to Traditional Astrology that takes you into working with sect as well as other things like whole sign houses that will give you a good overview on that. So just in the quick podcast version of that, if you're a day chart, Mars will be your out of sect malefic. And if you're a nighttime chart, Saturn will be your out of sect malefic. If you don't know whether you're a daytime chart or a nighttime chart, look at your birth time and just see, was it daytime or nighttime when you were born? There are some slightly technical ways to get into that, but that will cover off that question for most of you. Think about the time of year that you were born and whether it would have been, the sun would have risen at that point or not. Okay, so the out of sect malefic planet is one that has the potential to be a little bit problematic. And so that planet in our chart, Mars in a day chart or Saturn in a night chart, can describe some topics that are a little bit more challenging for you. It might be that it takes you more effort to get those parts of your chart and life as functional and fulfilling as you want. It may be that you deal with some ongoing issues around those topics and areas of your chart and life that just require a little bit more careful monitoring and managing. So I know the term is a bit scary, the out of sect malefic term, but it's not like a thing that means this part of your chart never works. It's not quite that. It's one factor to indicate this part of our life is going to maybe not be quite as smooth for you as it could be for others. So for Melissa, I think the heart of this question is about, what should I be maybe worried about or thinking about, given that Pluto is going to come up to make a conjunction to Mars, which has got that little prickly problematic designation for her. So first up, the first thing I always do when I get questions like this is to figure out the timeline. And so Melissa, the first thing for you to identify, and this is like tips for you for your home work or your home activities, what degree in Aquarius is your Mars? And if you can get access to an ephemeris to figure out exactly when Pluto will come to that Mars. If Mars is between 1 and 3 degrees of Aquarius, then Pluto will come to that Mars in 2025. If Mars is at 4 and 5 degrees of Aquarius, then Pluto's coming there in 2026. If Mars is at 17 or 18 degrees of Aquarius, Pluto's not coming there for another 10 years or so. So part of it is to, let's identify the topics in your chart and life that perhaps will be affected by this, but also to make sure that we have a realistic and reasonable understanding for the timeline. So Mars is generally about energy, about drive, about determination, about anger, and about assertiveness. So Pluto to Mars as a general theme can be about, I'm going to have to learn new things and different things about how I make decisions, how I take action, how I assert myself, how I recognize, acknowledge, and express or manage the anger that will come up. Now, anger is one of those words that people always have a little bit of a response or reaction to. It is a very normal emotion as a human being. Anger is often a cover emotion for something that is more vulnerable underneath. And that's something that when you learn a little bit about therapy or you learn a lot about people, you come to understand we want to acknowledge anger when it shows up, and we want to understand what is the anger like standing in front of. And so I think there's a lot of work that any of us having Pluto Mars transits can do about getting into the things that anger us, the things that make us really frustrated or irritated, or the things that maybe even prompt a little bit of that rage response in us. What is activating or triggering that for you? Where is that coming from? And might that be a clue that that's a topic or part of your life or a person that you're in, an interaction with where you are not advocating for what you want? Mars is such an independent, assertive planet that when Pluto comes to Mars, we want to make sure that we have expressions for our independent, autonomous needs and desires. We say that Mars represents the I want principle, and that's going to be a really intensified principle as Pluto comes to Mars. So there's some general things there about Mars, but I would also be looking at the topics of the houses ruled by Mars. And you've mentioned Aquarius 5th house, which probably means if I'm doing this I'll try to do it correctly, but it's actually better if I look at a little wheel and don't guesstimate. Okay, so Aquarius fifth house, Capricorn here. So we have Aries on the seventh house. I hope I'm doing this correctly. And Scorpio on the second. So this is a Libra rising chart. Libra rising, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Aquarius on the fifth. So we have, sometimes my brain does it backwards, which is why I was like the visual. So Mars in your chart, Melissa, and anyone else who has a Libra rising, Mars rules your seventh house where you have Aries and your second house where you have Scorpio. So Mars is about money and income, spending and saving habits, because Mars rules that Scorpio second house. And Mars is also about your primary one-on-one relationships. If you're in a romantic relationship, it's going to be the relationship you have and also the partner that you're in a relationship with. So Pluto to Mars is bringing some major shifts around income, money, spending, savings, investing, finance topics, second house topics. It's also going to bring some major adjustments in those interpersonal dynamics about how you assert yourself, how you find shared passions and projects to work on with a partner, and how you deal with baggage from the past. It's a big Pluto piece. So I know we're coming very close to the end of our time together today. So Melissa, I'm hoping that that gives you, I don't necessarily want you to be like, oh my God, I'm worried about all these things. I hope that you can find your own way to re-empower yourself about money, about earning, spending, saving, investing. So overhauling your budget, looking at how money comes into your life. Do you get money because you personally work? Do you get money from investments? Does a partner financially support you? And how can we tweak that so that you are more involved in that process? If you're working and earning your own income, you may be negotiating, better salaries or bonuses or pay conditions or flexibility or whatever it is that has value to you. If you're somebody who is provided for financially by a partner, you may be wanting to be an equal voice in that situation, even if you're not personally earning the money. And this is it can be a sensitive thing, but it's really important to get the balance right there. And of course, Pluto to the seventh house, this is the time where you're wanting deeper and more intense connections with other people. And you don't want to leave things unexplored or unexpressed. You're like, if we're really going to have this true intimacy, it's time that we figure this deep stuff out. And even though, Melissa, we started by talking about Mars, as we've learned that Mars is connected to the seventh house of relationships for you, a lot of what I was talking about in Aletsky's question about Pluto in the seventh or Pluto to the ruler of the seventh, that directly affects you because Pluto to your Mars is Pluto to the ruler of the seventh. So lots there. Hopefully there's a mix of tips around technique, how to do the astrology in your chart, but also some language about interpretive pieces, themes, and topics that will help all of you. Mebit New, Melissa, Angelou, and Aletsky. And I appreciate that your names online are probably mashups of names. So I'm sorry if I haven't got them right, but hopefully enough to recognize who you are or your question. And for all of you listening, I hope this has been helpful to give you a little bit of an insight and a few tips about understanding Pluto transits and how to work with them. As I mentioned before, I do have a detailed 90-minute webinar that gives you lots of info about all of the symbolism, the language I use, and the techniques that I use when I bring Pluto transits into a client conversation. That webinar is called Pluto Transits, Treasure, Truth, and Transformation. And you can find that quite easily on my website. Go to the classes or learn astrology section and just search Pluto Transits and it'll come right up. I'll put the link in the show notes below to make it super easy for you. Thanks everyone for joining me for another episode of the Kelly's Astrology Podcast. I'll be back to share more next week. Until then, take care.